Hello, and welcome to our set of exercises based off of the Lesson 6 curriculum. The first part of the slideshow is a review of for loops and nested for loops, so while we won't be going over them again today, it may be a good idea to review them before beginning. But right now, let's skip to the warm-ups. The first warm-up asks us to write a program that prints the integers 1 to 10 on individual lines. It's pretty straightforward, so you can pause the video here, create a new REPL, and try it yourself. If you're stuck, don't overthink the problem. We aren't working with nested for loops yet, so this program should only require one loop. Once you've finished, take a look at the key. Our for loop creates a counter variable I that is initially set to 1 and is incremented by 1 each time the loop is run. We used a less than or equal to sign when setting the bounds for the loop because we wanted to make sure that 10 was included. If we had set the bounds as I is less than 10, it would have only printed out the numbers 1 to 9. For this reason, you could technically also set the bound to I is less than 11 or something like that, but it's probably not as practical to look back at later. Let's move on to the second warm-up. We don't have to write any code here, but take a look at the question. We're asked to look at the code given and predict what would be printed out as a result of running it. Try pausing the video here and finding the solution without actually copying and running the code. Now look at the key for the second warm-up. The code, when run in repl.it, should print out girls followed by code on the next line, but should not print out the word who. Let's walk through the problem together. Initially, we're given two variables, C and D, which are set to 7 and 11 respectively. The outer if statement checks whether C is less than 10. If it was not less than 10, then none of the code inside of it would run. However, C is equal to 7, which is less than 10, so now we have to look at the rest of the code. Note that just because C is less than 10, we already know that the program will print out the word girls. Then the second if statement, which is nested inside the first one, checks whether D is less than 10. It's equal to 11, so the code inside of it will not run, meaning that the word who will not be printed out. However, there is an else statement attached to this if statement, so its code will run, printing out the word code.
Now we'll move on to the practice problems for today, which focus on nested for loops. For practice 1, we are asked to write a program that uses a nested for loop to print 8 rows of 8 stars. Pause the video now and write your code. If you're stuck, review practice 1 from the Lesson 6 slides, which can be found in the description below. So for these exercises, we will first work on the outer loop, then on the inner or nested loop. For the outside loop, we know we have to make 8 rows, so we'll repeat the outer loop 8 times. Since we want to have 8 stars in each row, we will use the inner loop to print a star and a space 8 times as well. This could be done using one for loop, but for right now, we are practicing using nested for loops, so we'll do so. Okay, so we'll move on to practice 2 now, which asks us to print the upside down 5x5 triangle made of stars. We are given the hint to use double spaces and a space before the star for our repeated output. Pause the video now and write your code. Like the previous exercise, we know how many rows we want to have, so we will make the outer loop repeat 5 times. Now for this, we can see a pattern where there will be one more double space in each row. The first row, which we'll call R0, so it corresponds to our outer loop, has 0 double spaces. Row 1 has 1, row 2 has 2, and so on. We can also see that there will be one less star in each row. Row 0 has 5, row 1 has 4, and so on. You could think about this like a linear equation. For spaces, we have y equals x. For stars, we have y equals 5 minus x. We can then use this logic to create the bounds for our for loops. Alright, so this next one has a similar structure to practice 2. We are asked to use nested for loops to create a pattern of numbers and periods. We are told that there is a space after each entry in the grid, so every number or period we print will have a space after it. Pause the video now and write your code. If you're stuck, look back at the previous exercise and its use of 2 for loops inside the outer loop. For practice 3, we will start with the same structure as practice 2. Our outer for loop will repeat 5 times, and we will have 2 inner nested for loops. In each row, we have one more period than the last. Row 0 has 0 periods, row 1 has 1, and so on. These bounds are identical to the ones in practice 2. We will also have one less digit in each row. Row 0 has 5 digits, row 1 has 4 digits, row 2 has 3 digits, and so on. These bounds are identical to the ones in practice 2, but what we print is going to be different. We can see that the digit that is repeated is increasing each row. Since we're already keeping track of the row numbers with the outer loop, we can use the second nested loop to print I plus 1 however many times each row needs to fill the grid.
Okay, time for the last practice problem. For practice number 4, given a variable n from the user, we have to create an n by n multiplication table. This problem may seem a little bit daunting or confusing at first, but try pausing the video here so you can try to work through it. If you get stuck, look at the previous 2 practice problems again and think about how you can use the same concepts here. Also, remember to use the scanner to take in an input for n. Now let's look at the key and go over the code together. The first important thing that we have to do, like I said before, is import the scanner and use it to get the value for n. Here, our variable is called num instead of n. After we've done that, we need to create 2 for loops, one nested inside of the other, because we know that we're making a 2-dimensional grid. The outer for loop controls the number of columns. We set it up so that our counter variable I goes from 1 to num and is incremented by 1 each time. The inner for loop, which controls the number of rows, is set up the same way, since the number of columns and rows in our grid will both be the value of num. Inside the second loop, since we're creating a multiplication table, we need to print out the value of I times j. However, we're trying to make sure that the grid is printed out nicely, so that any single-digit numbers line up with double-digit ones. The way we can do that is by using an if statement to check if I times j divided by 10 is less than 1. If so, we add a space before and after the number. Otherwise, in the else statement, we only add the space after it. Finally, remember to use one last empty print statement after the nested loop but inside of the outer loop so that the numbers don't all print out on one line.
Thanks for watching. These slides and the others in the series are available on our website and in the description below. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to reach out to us through our email, ccagirlswhocode@gmail.com.